end it off here. One interesting point just from yesterday's class, I think that Rabbi and I had a little chat afterwards about what he was trying to get to. Remember, we were having a conversation about that. It was interesting. I finally figured out what he was saying, and I liked it a lot. Remember, there was two analogies of this fusion of the essence of the soul with the 10 spheres of the soul, with the garments of the soul. Okay, so that was one was. Does anyone remember what the two analogies were? I mean, we actually maybe did 4 or 5 when it was all through, but so I don't want to confuse you guys. But one was the jewelry analogy, right? That if you put takshitim on yourself, it's like you become one. They become one with you. And this was and then of course the translation for tikkunin, which is basically the whole mimer so far, is about these 10 tikkunin is garments. So he said that the human body is a garment for the soul. So we said, why does he bring these two analogies? Especially, it seems like the body being a garment for the soul is a much better analogy, seemingly, in order to get across the fact that two things become one, right? That it's not just wearing something, but it actually lives inside of it and it brings the thing to life. So what do we gain from the two analogies? So I can't say that this is 100%, but we anyway have to answer the question: why does he bring two analogies? And I like this a lot. So basically what we're talking about here is the fusion of like light and vessel in a certain sense, right? In other words, two things are coming together. Just like when the soul comes into the body and joins with it, the soul is like light, the body is like vessel. And there's a unique concept when light and vessel come together. It says there's a change that happens to the light and there's a change that happens to the vessel. I think maybe you could say these two analogies are referring to these two different things. That the light, as we've been saying yesterday, it has a advantage. That's why they're called tikkunin also. It's papashtus, it helps it fixes it. It's like adorned with jewelry, because the light now has, as we said yesterday, the ability to express itself in ways that it could not before. When the sort of infinite or pashut, the simple, uncompounded light of the soul, goes into the kelim, goes into the body, it can now be expressed. In other words, hidden theoretical powers that it had can now show themselves. And what are those powers? As we said yesterday, the powers that are shaykh to the other. Right? When it's all by its one, when it's a single entity, it's not relevant to anything else. Right? To express itself to any type of relationship. Relationship is not basically available to it. But it has the potential for relationship inside, but until it actually goes into its body of either 10 spheros or intellect and emotion, however you want to call it, the physical body, it then actually manifests and activates its power to relate to the other. And this is something it didn't have before, seemingly in a revealed way. So that's called an adornment. The light gains from that experience. From like the vessels give something to the light that it didn't have before. That's the analogy of the jewelry, because it adorns the person. It actually beautifies and gives the person themselves something that it didn't have before. The analogy of the body and the soul is the other way around. It's the idea of giving the vessels something that they didn't have before. And there's a total fusion. Each one gains. When two things come together and become one, these two things, the light gains expression, the vessels gain the ability to basically come alive. And it was before that, they were just garments, right? They had no real life in them, right? And when the soul comes to the body, it's now a living body. As we said before, you don't wear your body. Right? When your soul goes into the body, it becomes completely united with the body to the point that it's a living body now. And so that, certainly the vessels did not have before the soul entered it. So they also have a tikkun. They also get fixed, as it were. Maybe you could say these are the two kind of parts of the analogy. Anyway, I wanted to close that loop. These are the kind of things that bother me. I don't know.
Fair.
Yeah. So going on, the last thing we wound up saying was that we see that the seichel and the midos, the intellect and the emotions, are not atzmius, they're not essential, because they change, right? In other words, that a person, his emotions go from small to big. A child is excited about simple things, an adult matures, and so his emotions grow, and as well his intellect grows, right? There's a concept that all the while you get older, if you're a Talmid Chacham, you get wiser. So we see that that's not shaykh to the essence of the soul, which is something nitzchi, something eternal enduring and cannot change, right? So we're seeing that that those midos are clearly not the essence of the soul. Because let's take it from inside. We'll just sort of help, the Alter Rebbe will help us along here. So in the second column, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down, towards the end of the line at the period. So the real essence, eino mekabel shinoim b'mikri haguf, right? The real essence of the soul does not experience any changes from what happens to the body. So now we're talking about all of a sudden the soul and its entering into the body. That we said that in fact the soul does experience pain when the body stubs its toe, because they fuse together and they become one. However, that's only the aspect of the soul which is shaykh to entering the body. But the essence of the soul, which never fuses with the body, right? It certainly does not feel pain when the body stubs its toe, because that would make it Baalei Shinoi. It would be like a changing entity. A second ago it didn't feel pain, now it does feel pain. That kind of conversation is not shaykh with the essence of the soul. It's only shaykh with that aspect of the soul which fuses and becomes one with the body. Clear? Right. She'einu mislabeshes v'atzmusa b'guf. It doesn't, because that essential part of the soul, it doesn't actually go into the body. Ela ha'roseha v'kochoseha. Only a ray of it, only its powers. In other words, the powers being the 10 spheros, which are sort of secretly contained in it in potential, they suddenly come out and invest themselves into the body, right? But the part of it which is beyond its 10 spheros, because in the beginning, the simple light, which is pashut and uncompounded, it does have 10 spheros in it. So that sounds like a big contradiction. It's just those 10 spheros have no expression or shape to them, so they don't take up any space. So the only thing that's really experienced inside of that light is simplistic oneness. It's just that in theory and potential, it has the ability to have powers. It's just that until the vessels come along, those powers don't actually manifest. So when the soul actually does go into the body, the powers which are theoretically contained in it, they manifest and go into the body, but the essential oneness of the soul doesn't come down in there with him, in a way that the body can hold on to it and experience it and grasp it. Is that clear what I'm trying to say there?
Do it again. Clear. Do it again, because we're close. We're right there. We're right at...
What we're saying is there's basically two parts of the soul, right? And they're existing as one.
Right.
There's the 10 powers of the soul, or even you could say like infinite spheros, characteristics. And why do I say infinite characteristics? Because if you're going to try to truly explain or define Hashem, there'll be an infinite number of characteristics, an infinite number of spheros, right? In theory. Because how can you explain something which is simple, right? You would go on forever. When I say simple, again, I mean uncompound. It doesn't have parts. It's a perfect. We don't even have anything like that in the world that we can point to and say like that. Really, we would just be sort of pretending. But the true God, He doesn't have parts. He's one. Hashem Echad, right? So if you're going to try and describe something which is absolutely indescribable, then the descriptions will go on forever. There's no end to the things you could say because it doesn't have a limitation. So all those descriptions, interestingly, are actually inside of Hashem theoretically, because His oneness automatically bears out the ability to be infinitely described. And when He comes down to it, He takes these 10 spheros. You're laughing because it's just so cool?
No, because the expressive.
Okay? So try not to laugh at me, right at me, but that's fine. You can be behind closed doors, when no one's looking. I do that myself sometimes. That's a neat trick.
I love the expressive.
Here comes Avi's hug.
There it is.
It's just he's landed. So now the thing is that therefore you can see that there's an infinite theoretical number of things that are automatically a part and parcel of a perfect oneness. In other words, it's like two sides of a coin. You can't get away from the theoretical infinite number of things when you have pure oneness, because the expression of pure oneness is an infinite number of things, right? But those infinite things, they're all theoretical because they don't interfere with Hashem's being truly one. So they're all what we call a state of like metzias bilti metzias nimtza. It's kind of a lashon that they use. It's an existence which is found, which is not in a state of existence at all. It's there and it's really not there. Because the overwhelming, it's like a drop of water in the ocean, right? It just does not take up any place. You can't identify it. All there is ocean. But theoretically, it's in there. So what makes it come out is actually the presence of the vessels, right? When the vessels come out, suddenly these little theoretical details, they find a home because the vessels are separate from each other. But the problem with the vessels is they don't actually have life in them. And when it comes to the body, okay, you can have a body lying there with no life. But this is spiritual. This is before we get to a body. If the body doesn't even have like energy to make it be. So a little bit of that life force has to go into this theoretical like body in order to actually enliven the body. And by doing so, that's what we mean, that there's a fusion of the light and the vessel. Right, that the actual, some of the Or Ein Sof that here actually goes into and brings shape and life to this vessel and becomes one with it. It's very subtle. In other words, like there's almost like there's these forms that are theoretical forms, and when the light comes into contact with these theoretical forms, then the theoretical shapes inside the light bring those forms to life and create vessels.
And they're no longer theoretical.
They become actual.
Physical, actual.
But the point I was trying to make a moment ago is that the only part that fuses with those vessels is the theoretical multiplicity inside of the Or Ein Sof. But the part of the Or Ein Sof which is still one, it never comes into contact with those vessels because the vessels can't hold that by definition.
Is that the external part of it?
Yes, it's the external part of it. Now it doesn't mean to say, and this is where we left off class last time, it doesn't mean to say that the oneness part doesn't also find itself somehow in the place of the vessels, because the whole thing is taking place inside of Hashem's essence and unity. It's not like it goes out of Him. It's just that it's not experienced in any way, shape, or form by the vessels, because it's there in a way where it's not like something inside being contained. On the contrary, the whole experience of light inside a vessel is being contained inside the oneness. Not that the oneness is being contained inside of the vessels. So that's a little bit of another conversation. He's not really getting to that so much here, but I'm just trying to fill out the story. That last part, did anyone understand? That the essence is found all through. It's like we're saying, the Or Ein Sof is in this room, but it's not in any particular object and nothing can feel it. Because quite the contrary, we're inside of it. And we're not, it experiences us, but we don't experience it.
You're talking about Makif versus Panimi?
Yeah, Makif versus Panimi, right? So anyway, what we're saying here is that what is the aspect that goes into the vessels? Just its shine, ha'ara, a ray, and its kochos, its powers, but not the essence of the thing itself. Right? Because those powers, those rays, hen hispashtus baguf, they in fact do go and express themselves into the body, umislavshos bo, and they invest themselves, they dress up into the vessels. And hen mekablim shinoim. And when those lights go into those vessels, those lights can actually experience change. And it was not just the body grows, the emotions grow. The light inside the body grows. Mitzad haguf, hamekal bekaten kach v'zaken bekach. And why is that? Because they really get unified with those vessels to the point that what happens to the vessel happens to the light. They become one thing. That if the child can receive it like this, the elder one can receive it like this, and so forth. V'gam ha'seichel v'amidos einan rak ha'aros hanefesh v'kochoseha. And just like, in other words, just the general soul that goes into the body is limited. What is that soul? It's intellect and emotion. So these two, these intellect and emotion, they are also merely a ray of the nefesh, a powers of the nefesh, hamispashtos baguf, that they're the ones that can go and be low enough and most external enough to find themselves into a body. The einan atzmius nefesh u'mahusa, but they clearly, therefore, are not the very essence of the nefesh at all, the intellect and the emotions, right? Because the very fact they can go in and be contained by the vessels, right there, they're disqualified from being the essence of the nefesh. Ella, shanefesh po'eles umispashetis bekochos va'aros halalu. But this is like kind of the point we were saying about the jewelry. The soul gains something from its experience of going down and being in this body, because through this the nefesh can be po'el umispashet. It can express itself. It can identify itself. In other words, there's something quite awesome that when you go away from the oneness and you start to enter into this infinite number of descriptions that try to describe the oneness. Now the truth is, any one of those descriptions is going to fall very, very short of actually describing the oneness. But hey, I'd like to see that anyway, Try to describe God. Do your best. That's because if you don't, there's no knowing of it at all, right? And especially when he picks out of the infinite number of descriptions, quite literally, he picked 10 So those must be some juicy ones, right? He picks 10 out of the infinite number of descriptions, and he says, you know what, these will describe me the best. Not only the best, but perfectly. This is me. So even though, how can you say this is me? It's like 10 things trying to describe something undescribable, but it's Hashem's description of himself. So this is something amazing, that you can now see Hashem, and he can express himself.
Hashem could put the infinite power in those 10 things.
Well, that's the beauty of it. He could put the infinite into those 10 things specifically, right? And that's what's so bizarre. That right there is what's so bizarre. Our whole religion, which is extremely bizarre, is based on this, that you can only find God in a pair of tefillin made in such and such a way, and not if it's 1 centimeter left of the center of your head. There you won't find God. That's a different description. It doesn't describe him. Right? This whole thing, and the whole religion is like that. And people are wondering why we're caught up in these little details. Because that's how you describe God, and not like that.
Because it's so specific.
Because it's a miracle. It doesn't make sense. Because Hashem chose these spheros to describe his infinite essence. Because for some reason, it's the true description of his infinite essence. Does that make sense to like a mortal mind? Not really. But that's the way he did it.
So if we have infinite spheres, then we would be able to serve God basically any way we want.
Right, and there are worlds like that. There is a world before he comes down into his...
You can see it out in the world. You can see it.
No, but that's tohu. I mean, yeah, all the infinite things you see are him, but they're not describing him, they're hiding him.
But there's still an expression.
Okay,
it could be an expression.
But it's an expression
we
of...
have specifically these things, but those still are an expression of what it could be. Like
You're right, but the difference, I totally agree with you, and that's why what's the function of the Jewish people? To take every single detail in the world without destroying it or changing it, and converting it to Judaism. Because if you don't, it winds up being a description of him, but it's actually hiding him. And so when you look at it, you don't see God. You see the opposite. You see the opposite, absence of God.
Right.
You see. So when you put those special 10 spheros and you filter all those infinite spheros through the 10 that he chose, then all of a sudden you reveal that they are a description of God. Short of that, they actually are the way Hashem conceals his essence, i.e., the world.
If that's the case, if you only create it through those 10 spheres, how can there be other things in this world?
No, because the truth is, I'm sort of just going with you.
Right.
None of those infinite spheres find themselves in this world. Everything in this world is an infinite combination of the 10.
Right.
So we're actually all about 10 spheros over here. We never get to the infinite.
So let's say like 10.
Yeah.
Like different religions, they have their own combination of 10 spheres, or do they have like
own combination? What does Rashi say? Right, when it's coming right up in the parshas pretty soon. He says that he remarried Keturah. He blessed the children and sent them to the east and gave them gifts. And what does Rashi say the gifts were? Shemos Hatuma. He gave them the contaminated names of God, which is basically because basically whatever he had them, and he didn't want them to get seriously. He didn't want Yitzchak. He didn't want he learned about them. Yeah, he didn't want Yitzchak to inherit them, so he sort of gave them outside the family.
And sent them
to get them.
Well, they're inside
which is the Eastern religion,
right? Which is Hindu.
Right. What's really exactly. It's so the idea is that those are the same 10 spheros, but there's shame of tuma. In other words, they describe the thing, but cloaked in a form of idol worship. Instead of showing the oneness, how all these 10 things come and show God, they show them as individual deities and individual sciences, and they're lacking the unity. Because what is Tuma? It's unable to come into the Beis HaMikdash. Something which is Matame, it cannot come into the it cannot really see God. So it's all the powers of God hidden in some kind of a Mesach, Mavdil, I don't know.
You also could have not done that though.
No, not really, because they're there. In other words, they need to be converted to Judaism at some point, right? You can't destroy. It's not necessarily to destroy. There's some milah that could come from changing them over, because the wisdom is true. It's just that it's contaminated. I mean, yeah.
That's why you were saying that these two types of thought that created everything, that created everything.
Yeah.
It still creates everything.
Yeah.
They're like the external part of Hashem.
Yes.
That's what
His ability to express himself outward. So that's where we left off, actually. That through these, the nefesh can express itself, which is a big adornment for the nefesh. And it's mispashetes bekochos v'ha'aros halalu. It expresses itself in these powers, in these rays. Makom makom einan levushim nifradim mamish. But these particular 10 spheros are not garments in the normal sense, because they're not, as we've been saying over and over again, they're not separated garments. They're not names of Tuma. They're names of Kedusha. right? These 10 spheres that we're talking about right now, they're garments that actually help Hashem. Remember we talked about this in the beginning. There's garments that reveal and there's garments that conceal. So these are the garments that reveal. In other words, even though they were calling them garments, and garments is usually not used in this context. Usually garments means something you hide your body with, but we're talking about the garment of the body itself, and it actually shows the Eibishter what he is. Unlike machshava, dibur, maisa, unlike your thought, speech, and action, your regular garments of your soul. Now this is an interesting thing. Those garments are actually concealing garments, and this is what he said. These are like the names of Tuma, but they're good because you can transform them to mirror the true names.
Even though we can't transform Tuma, we can only transform Nova.
Who said you can't transform Tuma?
Well, go on.
Tuma, you go into the mikveh and it's transformed. It's not Gimel Klippas HaTameis that we're talking about necessarily. The thought, speech, and action are not Gimel Klippas HaTameis. They're not the 3 impure levels of Klippa. It's, at least that's not what it says over there. It says Shemos HaTuma. Now it might be that they're, in their contaminated form, they are caught up in the Gimel Klippas HaTameis, or at least in Klippas Noga. In other words, they're not showing God. But the beauty of it is you can transform them. In other words, it depends who's wearing them. Right? If the godly soul is wearing them, etc. Anyway, so these types of garments are an adornment for the soul. Unlike the thought, speech, and action, they're not an adornment for the soul, i.e. they don't bring out the soul's true nature. They actually are slapped on top of the soul and hide the soul. Then when you're actually using words, right, and you're seeing somebody's expressing themselves by words, you're dafka not seeing their emotion. You're seeing a screen, like a force field, some kind of a detached level where you have to translate from this foreign entity and try to understand what's going on the inside. Because they're truly separated from the person. They're not the person. And what's the proof? They're sitting over there on a painting on the wall. You think that's me? It's just my painting. Right? They actually separate from my body, and you're going to go look at this painting and you're going to try and understand me. That's a neat trick, and yet it's kind of can be done. There's all kinds of sciences. Let a kid draw a little picture and scribble, and you can know all about their personality, right? Because the truth is, they do invest some aspect of themselves, but it separates from them. So it's not nearly like we were saying before, that the soul actually becomes 10 spheros, and it's like this total transference of revealing yourself through a finite entity. This is already something other than you slapped onto you as a garment. That's the thought, speech, and action. Shehen ha'aros v'kochos ha'malbishim mamish. These are different types of powers that conceal and wrap themselves around your kochos ha'nefesh. Right? They malbishim mamish es ha'nefesh. Kemo levush ha'machase, like a covering garment as opposed to a revealing garment. Aval ha'seichel v'amidos hen ha'aros v'atzmius. But when it comes to the intellect and emotion, the true 10 spheros, they're already a shine from the essence of the soul. They're not the essence of the soul, but they're a shine directly from the essence of the soul. Versus the thought, speech, and actions where we're really a shine of a shine. And therefore they don't really connect with the essence at all. And ve'enon levushin mamish. Therefore these 10 seichel and midos, you can't really call them garments in the normal sense of the word. Ela tikunin. That's why when the Pesach Aliyah begins, it doesn't call them garments right off the bat. It says these are the tikunin that we call spheros. It doesn't call them levushim, because it's a special type of levush called a tikun. One second. Why are they called tikunim? Because the soul gets a tikun. It gets an adorned from them. It's not like really a yerida, like a covering garment. It just hides. It doesn't show. These bring out something the soul could not show when it was by itself without these vessels and garments. Right? It's great to see that the soul can actually have intellect. That's an amazing power. I didn't know that the soul contained it until you gave it a brain. Right? And this is exactly fitting in with what we started this class with. It's that what is the mashal of the jewelry? Right? It brings something out of the body. It gives the body something it didn't have before. It makes the person more beautiful. Who's now adorned in this and made beautiful and more pleasing through this. So the essence gains through the spheros. Even though the spheros are a huge contraction. And it's mamish like finite versus infinite. The finite gives something to the infinite that the infinite didn't have without it. And it fixes it. All right, Tzemach, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so you said that the Bia, thought, speech, and action,
Mm-hmm.
that's like the garment of the garment?
That's the garment of the garment. You could say that.
Which is,
The concealing
The
garment.
10 Sefirot. The garments of the 10 Sefirot.
The garments of the 10 spheros. Now, just to be clear, not to confuse, but all the thought, speech, and action, like Bri, Yitzir, they all have their own 10 spheros.
I'm talking like in the
But they're 10,
general-
they serve a different function, right? The function of the Atzilus spheros, they serve to reveal the soul, and this function of the other 3 sets of 10 spheres, they serve to wrap themselves around those very first 10 spheres and hide them.
Actual clothes.
Right? So instead of seeing the emanator, which is Atzilus, you don't. You see only the creation, because the first set of 10 spheres hides the emanator and only shows you his creation. So it right away cuts you off from realizing this is God, because now it's just God's creation, right? The Bria. So that's already like the major cut off right there, and then it just gets worse and worse. Then that Bria itself cloaks itself in Yetzira, and that itself cloaks itself in Asiyah. By the time you're done, you have to really, really deeply think that, and try and figure out how this is actually God, or godly. Yeah, Avi.
So, you usually wrapped around you. So, wrapped around you like tefillin?
Like tefillin. Although I would say tefillin is probably more of a garment which reveals in this particular sense. But
Reveals our oneness.
Original question about why are Sefirot called Tikkunim or not yet?
so yeah, we basically have answered. I think that's exactly what we just did. Now we know why the Zohar calls these spheres tikkuni, because they ultimately, it means to dress up, but it also means to fix, and that these are types of dressing up that fixes. It's not a separated garment. It's a united
It doesn't
garment.
really fix it, just like
It gives it
makes
something.
better or-
Okay, makes it better. It's called fixing.
This is a question. The devotion mamish, which is Shabat Remaisa, they have more. Tell me if I'm thinking ahead or not, but don't they have more advantage than the spirits themselves, than the seichel midas? Because to them, wouldn't it? Because that's act when you bring out the neshama out, mamish, when you're actually thinking good and not just within.
Well, you're not thinking. Okay, well, let me cut you off because I get what you're saying, but no, and yes. I like what you're saying. It doesn't actually bring the neshama out mamish, because quite to the contrary, you're not seeing the neshama mamish when you're seeing the person's speech. But what is great about it is that it brings the neshama. It's also a positive thing. But the problem is it could be negative. See, what it does is it creates a whole lower realm. See, since it's not the neshama, so what is it? It's like this tachtonim, right? It's something you're putting on top of it. It's a true separateness, right? The garments of the soul, intellect, and emotion. We're saying that even though they're separate, they're really not. They're just the powers that are inside showing themselves outside. So that's really still one thing. It's just like hidden powers that Hashem had are now seen. That's the first 10 garments, right? But these next ones, we're saying they're not part of the soul. They're separate. They're like clothes you put. Where do they come from? This is a creation. This is the creation of something which is so low, it doesn't look like it's God at all anymore. It's the biggest clipper you could imagine. But the positive thing is, now that Hashem has created the lower station, He can now truly fulfill His will, which is to make a dira b'tachtonim. It was not shy to make a dira b'tachtonim, a dwelling place in the lowest world, until He made the lowest world. So He had to first create something which was so low, vessels which were so distant from Him that they weren't even godly anymore. And that's like the letters of thought, speech, and your actions. They're not even you. It's like something separate. What is separate? Separate is distinct from Hashem. But the fact that you can take those and make them mirror and parallel godly emotions, godly intellect, that's called making a dira b'tachtonim. So the ultimate nachas that Hashem really has is not from creating His 10 spheros, because He really had those 10 spheros inside, and now He's just showing them this Bria, Yitzir and Asiyah, is like a true chiddush, because it's something which appears truly separate from Hashem for the first time. And yet the fact that you can take that Bria and manipulate it according to the 10 spheres of Kedusha, that's called the dira b'tachtonim, because now you have the tachtonim and you're going to manipulate it according to Hashem's will. This is His ultimate nachas. So it has an advantage even, but it's not that it itself is advantageous. It itself is dafka the lowest thing, but working with it and using it is basically the purpose of everything. So therefore it is great and greater, if you will, but not, it depends on what we're talking about.
The lowest is like always the highest.
Right. All right, let's go on in the mimer. So he says, Al derech ze yuvangam lamayla biyud sfiros. So we really kind of did this already in terms of bringing the analog back in, but I'm sure he'll do it better. So he says, in a similar way, we can understand also Lamaila, how things are above. In the Yud Sfiros Shanikra Tikunim, in these 10 Sfiros that are called Tikunim. Hainu Chochma, Midos, Atzilus, which is all the Sfiros of Atzilus, and quote, Ihu V'garmu Ichad, as we said before, in the place where he becomes one with his vessels. That the vessels are not concealing, but revealing vessels. Eliyah hen b'chinas levushin mamesh, whereas it comes to Bria Tzir and Asiya, these are real garments. V'aleihem amar levushin takinas lon. If you look into the original Pasach Eliyah that we read from the Siddur, after it says that there's these things called tikunin, it goes further and said he made garments for those. And the garments that he's talking about there is the lower garments, Bria Tzir and Asiya.
He made garments for the tikkun.
He made garments for the tikunin. And if you look in there, now you can start paying attention to the words. It's very exact. It's talking about the original tikunin is the 10 spheros, and he made garments for them. Kihine antu chakim. And then it goes on further in Pasach Eliyah and it says, you are wise. Perush ant. So what does it mean, you? When it says you are wise, remember I told you before, every word in here is like referring to some level. So you is referring to the Orein Sof, right? When it says you are wise, it's the Orein Sof is wise. I.e. Hakim, and the Orein Sof becomes wise. You are wise. It's not like you made wise and you crawled into it and you operated like a motor vehicle. No, you are wise, which is exactly what we've been saying, that the you actually becomes one with something called wise, wisdom, chokhmah, the spheros. Shenimshach b'chinas chokhmah. Right, so all this crazy ideas, literally in Pasach Eliyah in those 3 words, Antu Hakim. When it says that, what he really meant was this last couple days of class. It's just he said it in 3 words. That's what we need Hasidus to explain ourselves. So he says, Shenimshach b'chinas chokhmah al derech, and we call this B'makom shata motze gedulaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu sham ata motze anavas nuso. There's a quote that's in general is just kind of a lovely, endearing statement towards Hashem to describe His awesomeness. It says, in the place that you find Hashem's greatness, really you find His humility. And what it simply means is that, when it comes to like Hashem cares for the widow, Hashem cares for the poor, the downtrodden. So it says the place where you really find Hashem's greatness is that you find it in the places of humility in the world. In other words, He's the one who cares for the little guy, and that's what His greatness is. Where do you really find Hashem's greatness? In the humble places. That's the simple meaning of that expression. But in Hasidus it takes on a much deeper meaning. Yeah.
Why is the altar over here saying, making the contrasting of the relatives where the words are one, and with Bia where they're mostly not. The lower you go in Bia.
Why is he contrasting them? That's what we've been talking about the whole time, isn't it?
The more separate they are. Are we saying that Atzilus and Bia are like Atzilus is the Sephiros, the Chelika Sephiros, and Bia is, for example, the Shabat,
Yes. Okay. We've been saying that.
I just wanted to make sure because I wasn't.
Okay, that's definitely on the ball. Everyone's following that point, right? Because I think we tried to drive that home a little bit, yeah?
Did you mean Bria?
Bria Tzir and Asiya. Bia is an acronym for Bria Tzir and Asiya. It's an acronym. So that's right. So those are the separated garments, and the 10 spheres are the soul powers. Certainly. Okay. So anyway, Antu Hakim, you Orein Sof are wise. And what do we? You wanted to ask something?
You meant by the lowest place, right?
Right. So So the idea, you are wise. The idea is that Hashem's greatness is found in His humbleness. It is so a simple meaning we just said, but the Hasidic meaning is that really the only time it's shaykh to call Hashem great, right? Where do you find Hashem's greatness is in His humbleness, is that even greatness itself is a description. So that's not really Hashem's greatness. The fact you can call Hashem great is actually an insult. It's like saying someone who has like $1 trillion, you're saying, man, you're rich, you got one nice silver penny. It's like, whatever, is there such a thing as a silver penny, but a silver dollar, right? In other words, it's like you're impressing me with the fact that I have a silver dollar. Dude, I have $1 trillion. So it's like when you say Hashem, you're so great, it's laughable. What are you saying? What's great is like one little attribute to someone who attributes are meaningless because He has an infinite number of attributes. So, but nonetheless, and this is what we were saying before, like the miracle of all miracles, that Hashem truly is great. In other words, you can call Him great, and it's meaningful because He made himself finite, and the infinite can be expressed in the finite. So what is that called? Hashem's humility. The fact that Hashem can lower himself and be described by an individual characteristic, that truly is Hashem's greatness. So where do you find Hashem is called great? When he humbles himself and finds himself inside of one characteristic. So if you take that statement and completely rewrite it into the Hasidic parlance here, it means, that when is Hashem great? When is it shayach to call him great? When he actually contracts himself infinitely. So it's the opposite of what you think. His greatness is really, to you, what you say is great, to him is his ultimate infinite smallness, that he can even be contained in something that you can call great, that you can attribute to having. And what's even greater about it is that he actually is that thing, because he has the power to become one with finite attributes.
So are you saying that we can never serve God in this infinite way, or when we serve God by saying he's great, that's serving him infinite, and that's
It wasn't
serving him infinite, or we're only serving him and in his finite sense?
It wasn't talking about serving. I think you were just talking about describing.
Or just describing, whatever.
Okay, but you got a good question there. In general, you're tapping into a deep question, which is, if really the whole interface of God with us is these 10 spheros, does that mean we never get to experience the real God? I think that's what you're asking. Or either communicate with the real God, or help, or do something for the real God, right? So the truth is that that's kind of the beauty of these 10 spheros. The fact that he truly becomes one with them,
so in a way,
means that
through that.
Yeah, but it's not even through that. It's like he's in there, So in other words, that's what's so amazing, the kindness that he did for us. That it's impossible for a finite being to connect with an infinite being. There's just no mechanism which delivers that. Right. So Hashem made the world of Atzilus, where his infinite Ant Hu Chakim. You made the infinite into a Chachma. That itself is like sort of the most wonderful thing that could ever happen. That there is a way for us to grab onto a piece of tefillin and suddenly be serving the true one God. Like, what does that have to do with anything, Because he made himself finite.
So when we do mitzvah, what are we connected with? What?
So in other words, it's like it says, someone who holds on to the king, even if he's in 100 garments, you're hugging the king. What do you care if he's in one garment, if he's in his underwear, or naked, or if he's in 10 garments? You're hugging the body of the king, because he's in there, right? He's in there. So you're serving him, 100% him, right?
Well, to use the model of the king, just like if you're even in the castle, in the dominion of the king, and you do something and you plant a tree in the king's garden, he may not see that you planted a tree in the garden, but it's still beautifying the king's garden.
Okay, that's doing, okay. I hear what you're saying, but here it's like you can actually, what we're worried about over here is, can you actually touch the king himself? Or are you only relegated to his expressions? And what I'm saying is that inside of his expressions is him. Right? He's wrapped inside of these mitzvahs because that's his greatness, is his humility. It's different, I'm using this mashal from the Tanya, where it talks about hugging the king in his garments, because the idea is you're getting right up and touching the king himself. In addition to which, now let me go one step further. This is how you serve him with Torah and mitzvahs. But as we know, a Yid's neshama is higher than Torah mitzvahs. And as we spoke about yesterday, was sort of our exciting piece from yesterday, the ratzon of the soul is the Orein Sof of the soul. In other words, you yourself also go through this process of being infinite and one and dressing up in your own seichel and midos. So not only is Hashem going through this process, you yourself are going through this process. So you can serve Hashem with your infinite part. And when you serve him with your infinite part, it doesn't even know from descriptions. It goes right to the essence.
How do you tap into your...
That's your Chaya and your Yechida. This is the part of you which is beyond your intellect, beyond your emotions, and it's possible, the will. When you serve Hashem with Mesiris Nefesh, which is what the Rebbe is asking for us every single day, you go like essence to essence. You don't have to go through... Now, but nonetheless, so if that was the case, why did Hashem give us all this rigmarole of having intellect and emotion? Because what Yosef was saying before, serving him in the lower places is actually what he wants. So what the Rebbe even calls for is not just stam to have Mesiris Nefesh, which means you like literally give your life away for God, which would be to like Rabbi Akiva serve him at this high level, because then you nullified the world, but he wants the world. So what you're supposed to do is plug your Mesiris Nefesh into your intellect. Plug your Mesiris Nefesh into your emotions. In other words, you're a crazy radical, but you go with a suit and tie, and you talk to the mayor, and really what everyone else sees is that you're like a normal human being, but what's going on inside is that your will is like a burning volcano, because you're willing to die every second for Hashem, but you're clothing that in the lower world. That's what he really wants. Otherwise he wouldn't have made the lower world. Right? Seder. Right? That's how it translates in this room. Keep yourself together, because that's the lowest world. You know? You could say, but I was in the forest and I was really seeing God. That's great. That's not what he wants, though. He wants you in Seder.
Can you define Mesiras Nefesh just?
Giving the soul away. In other words, that part of the Jew which is just will just like run into an army of enemies single-handed, like Avram Avinu with a pile of sand in your hand, throwing it at them because like you're with God no matter what. You're going to give your life to sanctify Hashem's name, right?
Oh, what do we do? Let's throw some sand.
It doesn't matter. Like if serve God, fight these guys. What do I need? In other words, God is masterful. I'll just throw sand at them. Anything will work because it's completely beyond comprehension. Sand is not a metaphor. Sand was sand. No, but of course you're right. Sand is also a metaphor. I know what you mean, Moshe. I got your back. Anyway, so Atu Hakim, the place you find Hashem's greatness is that very place where you find His humbleness. Vadayin Eino Hakim b'Chochma Yediyah. Now, what is the Pasach Eliyahu? It's really going through word by word in this thing. If you become familiar with the Pasach Eliyahu, this will be much more satisfying. But anyway, we're doing our best. So he says, Antu Hakim v'lo b'Chochma Yediyah. So after all that, it says, you are wise, which is that whole story we just said, but not with a knowable wisdom. That's what it goes on to say. So what is a knowable wisdom? That would be the wisdom of the lower worlds of Bria Tzir Nasiya. In other words, even though you become wise, which is this wondrous thing that you bring the infinite and you fuse it with the finite, one sphere of Chokhmah, it's still a sphere of Chokhmah Vatzilus, which is not yet called a knowable wisdom, because it's still, because it's one with God, it hasn't really come down into the realm of the Bria. It's still completely beyond the comprehension of the creation, right? Because that's called a knowable wisdom. Just as a mamash aside point, because I would be remiss if I didn't say it, or maybe I'm just confusing you, but this is not always explained the same way. I went through the Maimer, and I'm pretty certain that in this case, you are wise refers to Atzilus, and a knowable wisdom refers to Bria and below. Yeah. Elsewhere, it's not always explained like this. I've seen mamash in this same sefer, even a few pages before. It says slightly differently, and not to confuse anybody, but just in all honesty, and we can work it out. But it says that Antu Hakim, that you are wise, refers to the level of Chokhmah as it still is inside of the Ein Sof.
Isn't that what you just said?
No, I said it's as it is in Atzilus.
Right, so one level down.
Right. Whereas Antu Hakim is that you, the Ein Sof, are Hakim, which means that even in the Ein Sof, remember we talked about there's like these theoretical spheros in there which do not encroach onto the oneness, but they're in there somewhere. That's called, in other mimers, that's called Antu Hakim. You are wise. Where there's the spheros of mamash a non-entity, and a Chokhmah Yediyah, whereas a knowable wisdom, right? You are wise, but not with a knowable wisdom. So over there, you are wise goes on that, and knowable wisdom goes on Atzilus. Because even though it's not knowable to the creation, it's at least in vessels. But that's not what we're saying here. And I don't mean to confuse you, but I'm just trying to bring you into the parsha here. Here it's the other way around. Yeah, before this seems to. Here it's the other way around. Here we're saying that you are wise refers to the you of the Ein Sof already investing itself into the spheres of Atzilus. You are literally now called wise in a Chokhmah Sphera. But that Chokhmah Sphera, because it's united with you, is in the world of Atzilus, which is beyond the creation, and therefore it's called not with a knowable wisdom, which is the knowable wisdom is already lower. So it could be explained both ways, but we're going with the latter right now.
Neither one of them is knowable. Whether you're talking about in the Ein Sof or even in Atzilus, neither one of them is knowable.
But here we're saying that in Atzilus it is knowable. That's the difference. Right? Here, I'm sorry, no, the other way around. Here we're saying that the Atzilus is not knowable.
That's what I'm saying. Neither one is knowable.
Right. Well, but the difference is that here Atzilus is not knowable, and over there Atzilus is already called knowable. Okay. That's the difference. Okay. And there's a reason for it. Notice, because even though Atzilus is not knowable, when it comes to its relationship to it's the exact same thing we got into this question with the Tzemach Tzedek and the Tanya discrepancy. Even though Atzilus is not knowable compared to the Bria Tzir Nasiya, it's quite knowable compared to what's above it. Right? Because it's already completely confined. So you could see it either way.
Cool.
Anyway, so we're saying that now we're talking about Atzilus is called Chokhmah but not a chokhmah yediyah. It's not a knowable wisdom. Elo shenikra hakim, but rather it's called by the word hakim, the fishu makra chokhmah. What does hakim actually mean? It means like a chokhmah maker. You're machkim, like you make something into chokhmah. So it's called hakim. It's not called chokhmah yedua. It's not called a knowable chokhmah tzilus. It's called a chokhmah maker, right? It's hakim because it's the source of what will actually be called chokhmah yedua. Mimena hamshachas chokhmah bebiyah, because from it comes out what's going to be knowable chokhmah to the creation, chokhmah bria tzir nasiya. So in other words, this is a very humbling thing to think about, that what we call chokhmah, first of all, bechalal, in a human body and in this realm of reality, it's pathetic what we call chokhmah. But even if you want to go up into the angelic forms of chokhmah, into the world of bria, right? It's only really called wise because the Or Ein Sof has to go into this intermediary, which is godly wisdom, and then only when God has already lowered himself into becoming wisdom, because God is really not shaykh to wisdom, he's beyond wisdom. But once Hashem will already lower himself to call himself godly wisdom, from there is the only ability that earthly wisdom even has any source whatsoever. Right? So the concept, there's a concept of intelligence in this world. It's not really intelligence of God whatsoever. Right? Because God's intelligence is beyond this world. It says over there it's the source of what will eventually be called intelligence. So Hashem had to lower himself infinitely just to be in the realm of showing us in our dimension what intelligence is. And that's why Jews are not all caught up with intelligence. And we do a lot of things because it says so in the Torah, if we don't understand them. Because we're coming from this perspective. That the whole concept of intelligence is a pretty lowly thing when it comes to dealing with Hashem. Because even by Hashem, he had to go into an infinite contraction even to have what's something called godly intelligence, let alone earthly intelligence. And if you want him, intelligence is pretty much the most useless tool you can imagine. Right?
So if Bria is angelic wisdom, Yetzirah would be what?
Also a lower form of angelic wisdom.
Still, and then Asiya is finally earthly wisdom?
Well, there's a spiritual Asiya, which is yet a lower form of angelic wisdom. And then finally, there's a whole other huge contraction
Once
to
you
go
go
into the
from
earthly
Malchut.
wisdom.
Yeah.
Right. But again, not to, that's a good way of keeping it in your mind. But each one of those worlds has an infinite number of worlds in between them. So there's an infinite number. And when I say infinite, I'm not exaggerating, so it's impossible to even imagine what's going on over here. But each one, world down, is incomparably lower wisdom than the world that's right above it. So by the time you get to the lowest point of spiritual wisdom, there's infinite levels of comprehension that are above it, and all that has not even yet become physical. When it goes to the physical container, it's like putting all that inside of like a garbage can, basically, like a rock, and just making it completely, you're seeing it now through physical, fleshy eyes, which means you have no comprehension whatsoever even to what the lowest level of spiritual intelligence is. And that's the lowest level of an infinite level of spiritual intelligence, and all of that is not even godly intelligence, only worldly intelligence. So it pretty much humbles the man. If you want to get together with Hashem, you just go ask Moses, because you're not going to figure it out. Right? That's the idea. Intelligence just doesn't go anywhere, right? So thank God we have a Torah. Otherwise, what would you sit around here playing cards all day? There's nothing you can do to exit our state of complete unknowingness and folly. It's just not in the realm of human hands.
Do these worlds have inhabitants?
They do have inhabitants, yeah.
Full house.
It's full house, yeah. I mean, it's happening up there. All right. Anyway, going on. So this is called Hakim, which is the Chokhmah Batzilus, is just called the Makar, the source of the Chokhmah, from which comes out the Chokhmah of Bria Tzir Nasiya. Hagam she'eino ruch, even though there's absolutely no comparison, Chokhmah de Bria, the Chokhmah of the world, to the Chokhmah Batzilus, and we say no comparison, incomparable, right? So much so, what's the analogy that's used for this? It's like for trying to say that you can grasp an idea with your hands. As it says in Tanya, anyone who hears such a thing would simply laugh at you, because you can't grasp an idea with your hands. What's he saying? He's saying this is the comparison to what Chokhmah Batzilus is compared to the Chokhmah of Bria and below. That you might think, I can't understand Hashem because it's such a complicated idea. It's so much more worse than you think. You can't understand Hashem because you're trying to use hands to understand an idea. It's like incomparable what is going on in the Chokhmah Vatzilus, the wisdom of God, to what it looks like in even Bria, which, as we said before, is infinite stages above here. So even though Hashem lowers himself to become the source of Chokhmah, it's still incomparable to what actual Chokhmah is in the created world. That's what he's saying here. V'kosha kein da'asiyah, if it's incomparable to Bria, how much more so to Asiyah and so forth. Lios nikr b'shem Chakim al shem zeh. That's why it's not called Chokhmah in Atzilus, it's called Chakim, to give that little indication that we're not dealing with something that you can grasp. It's unknowable wisdom. And this can be understood by way of analogy of what the sages said. Ein lecha kol esev. I think we're going to hold here for the day though, because this is a whole nother topic.
Can we go to the period?
Sure. V'gavoa mal gavoa. Shkoya.
Wait, so what are the inhabitants? What are the inhabitants of these? Wait, what are the inhabitants of these worlds? Like, what do they do
all day? They're praising. They're angels. They're in a state of constant devotion, and it's almost like stars. Basically, they just are in a state of.